We have a disaster.
What happened here on December 22nd, 2008, this was a watershed moment.
The Kingston spill was a signature collapse of a coal ash site.
In an instant, we knew we couldn't live there.
They were making money off of us and killing us at the same time.
You couldn't get away from it.
We have gone above and beyond. We've restored this area to better than it was.
It is completely recovered.
But I mean, they're still responsible for what they've done to our community.
Hey, I'm Jim Atheny, and this is TVA's Kingston fossil plant. It's one of the largest coal power plants in the country. But on December 22nd, 2008, this site was where you would find one of the country's largest environmental disasters. That's when the wall on a large storage pond where TVA stored the leftover ash from burning decades of coal collapsed. It unleashed an avalanche of sludge into neighborhoods and the Emory River. In this special, reporter Grant Robinson and I will show you what has changed in the last 10 years for the landscape here and the people. We'll also show you the difference in how TVA stores coal ash, and we'll get into the legal fights that are still not settled over the dangers and damage from this ash, a byproduct of burning coal for electric power. Now, after the ash spill hit, I was actually here that night, one of the first reporters out here in the dark trying to figure out what in the world was going on. So let's go back through the archives and we'll show you exactly what happened. But this disaster 10 years ago, it actually started building long before that.
TVA finished building the Kingston steam plant in 1955. At the time, it was the largest coal power plant in the world. It generated massive amounts of electricity and pollution.
Last year, the utility used a total of nearly 36 million tons of coal.
During the plant's first few decades, tiny particles of fly ash flew out of these short smokestacks and routinely coated the community in dust. TVA tried to keep people happy by cleaning the ash from their houses and their cars for free. The plant eventually built 2 giant smokestacks that could collect most of the fly ash before it escaped. But the plant still pumped plenty of pollution in the atmosphere that came down as acid rain.
Kingston steam plant will not comply with EPA standards
by emitting too much sulfur dioxide into the air.
While most of the concern about pollution focused on the air, a mountain of waste grew on the ground. That's where TVA built dams to create large ponds between the steam plant and the Emory River. And every year it dumped millions of tons of ash in the ponds, where it settled to the bottom for wet storage to keep the dust down.
We sluice the ash out to the pond, the ash settles out, it flows over to a stilling pond where there's further settling, and that's where we discharge from.
With pollution in the air and ash piling higher and higher, TVA engineers had already raised red flags in the 1980s about the stability of the ash ponds, but always opted for a short-term fix because overhauling the whole system could cost tens of millions of dollars. Then, 3 days before Christmas in 2008, the dam finally broke on a billion-dollar disaster.
At approximately 1 a.m., an ash containment area on the north side of Kingston fossil plant failed.
Windows breaking, furniture turning over, the house was shifting around.
A tidal wave of ash ripped Jim Sheen's house off its foundation and shoved it across the street while he was still inside.
His only goal, get out alive.
All the stuff can be replaced except for me. The doors were jammed shut. So I kicked the window out, climbed out the window before the house completely collapsed because it was popping and cracking when I was going out the window. Like I told the nurse, I don't usually go to church every Sunday, but I believe I'll go this Sunday.
Sheen escaped without any injuries, and nobody else was hurt by the initial slide. That's because it broke after midnight when there were luckily no cars on the road or people outside when Angie and Jeff Spurgeon heard an avalanche of ash bury their neighborhood.
I remember vividly when it happened. I thought a tornado coming through. The whole cove that we lived on was full of ash and mud and trees, and docks were gone. And it's sinking in what a major catastrophe this is, and I'm right there in the middle of it.
Sludge, ash, whatever they want to call it, pretty much everywhere.
Well, it's a disaster. It's an absolute disaster.
This whole area out here is going to turn into one big soup bowl. It already has.
Millions of gallons of sludge containing toxic materials flowed into the lake where people play and towns get their water.
We know there's one water intake downstream about 4 miles from here, and then we've been in touch with them. They have their water sampling.
The air we breathe and the water we drink meet all government safety standards.
But it's definitely killing the fish. They're dying. I mean, they can't breathe in that.
TVA began digging out what it could and using helicopters to scatter grass seeds on the mountains of ash.
A helicopter comes flying over and there's a dozer next door and they're tearing down the porch of my neighbor's house. You're bombarded. I'm worried about health, I'm worried about where I'm going to stay. We had saved and built that house, and then in an instant we knew we couldn't live there. We're going to leave there, and it was a wonderful place to live.
I think it's starting to sink in that I've lost everything that I've worked for my entire life.
People directly hit by the spill looked for new housing. And fear of toxins in the ash spread for families expecting children, with heavy trucks tracking sludge all around town.
It's kind of a fear of the unknown, but my understanding is if you breathe that, it's one of the worst dangers.
Crews in charge of the early cleanup tried to calm people's concerns.
This is just a piece of the ash. This is the material that was in the dredge cells.
But this moonscape soon had people in Roane County seeing stars.
Aaron?
A law firm paid Aaron Brockovich to come to Harriman. This environmental activist, famously portrayed in a Hollywood movie, spoke to a packed house of potential plaintiffs.
I am here first and foremost for you and my choice of who I thought would be the best legal team to help you.
Those guys are sharks. We don't need a bunch of out-of-state attorneys and sharks roaming the waters looking for victims.
As TVA put it, they promised to make people whole again and started buying homes for what it said was more than the appraised value. And people who sold had to sign an agreement not to sue. But these offers were take it or leave it, no negotiations. Many said TVA's offer was too low to buy an identical house somewhere else.
You're not going to be able to have what you had here for what they're offering you.
Not close.
I said, no, I'm not losing money because you screwed up the environment.
But not taking the offer would leave them to live in a disaster area, as ash coated their cars and the air filters inside their homes.
They said either you're going to take what we gave you or you can sit there and eat it. And we've been eating it. It's terrible. It's just something you couldn't imagine living in.
Over time, most holdouts sold out.
What's the point of living on a lake house when you can't get in the lake and you can't fish in it, you can't boat on it? It became where there was no choice. We had to leave. That's not right.
TVA bought 180 properties affected by the spill. As for the actual cleanup, TVA's crews started carefully removing ash from the Emory River. But they were doing it too carefully and slow. So in May 2009, the EPA stepped in and picked up the pace.
To really zero in on what needs to be done to move it faster.
And it's somebody different than the organization that created the problem, and to have the EPA on board, I think, is just so much better.
This is all ash that's come out of the river. That's dredging material. Big pieces of iron, dip it out of the pit. This used to be all ash. Contact is a small risk element. What you're worried about is ingestion or inhalation of ash.
Crews finished removing 600 million gallons of ash from the river in late spring of 2010. Then they began building an earthquake-proof wall and a protective cap around the 240 acres of ash left on the ground.
We've got all that gray ash out of there.
We put a liner over it, a couple of feet of topsoil and clay over that, and planted grass on it.
But the cost of recovery involved more than removing and burying ash. TVA gave millions to repair the image and economy of nearby towns and Roane County, plus $32 million to Roane County schools. In all, the cleanup cost TVA $1.2 billion. The utility says it has not had to increase rates because it makes enough money to spread the cost out over 15 years and still make a profit.
If people visit us, they'll never recognize that you had an environmental disaster.
TVA also tore down 100 homes and transformed the neighborhood into a public park with trails, fishing docks, and sports fields. As for the homes that were left standing, TVA sold 60 of them at auction in 2015. And some of the buyers were the same families forced to leave, including the Spurgeons, who felt safe living on the lake they love.
I don't see fly ash on my vehicles or anything.
So I was fine with coming back. You almost have to look at it like that's one phase of our life and that's over, and we're not going to be bitter.
While the Spurgeons have moved on, there's still some sadness over the spill scattering a beloved group of neighbors.
There was a lot of good people over there. You know, I mean, a park is nice, but it's not what it was.
Now, after the ash spill hit here, TVA did not stop burning coal at the Kingston plant. It kept making power and kept creating lots of ash. Coming up, we'll show you how they store the ash now and why TVA says it reduces the chance of another disaster.
Hi, I'm Grant Robinson. We're looking back on 10 years since TVA's ash spill here at the Kingston plant. All through the cleanup process and even today, TVA has never stopped burning coal and making more ash. So what happens with all that waste now?
The Kingston spill started a chain reaction that transformed how coal ash is stored across the country. But change didn't come quickly.
This was a watershed moment. What happened here on December 22nd, 2008 actually kind of was what precipitated that national dialogue. It kind of got the ball rolling as far as what we should be doing with this material. And then
it took 6 years for the EPA to establish minimum requirements for storing waste produced by burning coal. Coal ash can have 4 to 10 times the amount of heavy metals than coal dust before it's burned. Because of that, environmentalists push to have coal ash classified as a hazardous waste.
It's big quantities of industrial sludge and waste, and it contains heavy metals and toxins like mercury, lead, and arsenic, and they don't go away either, except by leaking into and leaching into our groundwater and our rivers.
But the EPA classified coal ash as a solid waste, with the storage requirements the same as landfills that take household garbage.
All of our new facilities are built to today's requirements, and that requires a liner. But when these facilities were built in the 50s, there were no liners. That's how they were built. Is there anything wrong with that? Well, it's not as good as today's standard, but the fact of it is we retrofitted this one with a liner on top.
Now more than 1/3 of coal ash at TVA power plants is sold to be reused in building materials like concrete. Ash that isn't reused is compacted in landfills with a liner on the bottom. What was the site of the wet pond at Kingston is now 240 acres of ash stacked 20 feet deep. TVA built a retaining wall around the landfill that should withstand a magnitude 6.0 earthquake. Then an impermeable liner was placed on top of the ash, but there's nothing on the bottom to keep it from seeping into the ground below. And critics say that method isn't safe enough.
the primary constituents in coal ash that we were most concerned about here was arsenic from the human health exposure standpoint, and then selenium more on the ecological side.
The EPA says arsenic levels at Kingston are 3 times higher than what occurs naturally, but that's not high enough to cause alarm. After the changes TVA took because of the ash spill, the Kingston site is TVA's poster child for how coal ash should be stored. But a decade after the Kingston disaster, TVA is tangled in lawsuits over problems caused by not changing how they store coal ash at other power plants across the state.
Breaking news, potential contamination near the source of Memphis's drinking water. The Tennessee Valley Authority told the state about high levels of arsenic, lead, and fluoride found in groundwater samples at the old Allen steam plant.
In both Middle and West Tennessee, leaking ash pits at TVA power plants posed risk to the drinking water of Nashville and Memphis.
The state of Tennessee itself has said that the way that TVA stores this coal ash violates Tennessee's own environmental laws here 10 years later, and that TVA needs to get the ash out of those unlined pits, and a federal court has held that TVA is violating the law.
TVA decided to excavate an ash pond in Memphis and put the ash in a modern lined landfill, but in court, TVA argued that method would be too expensive at its Gallatin plant outside of Nashville, and instead wants to close that pond by removing the water and putting a liner on top.
When you talk about environmental issues like this and closure of facilities, it always comes down to one thing, and that does it pose risk to the public? That's the question. We always have to answer that question. Do we pose unacceptable risk to the public? And the answer here is no, we do not. And how do we know that? Because we have all the data.
In Kingston, the water quality is now better than it was before the spill. Hundreds of sensors gauge water quality and seismic activity, and it's all monitored in real time at a command center in Chattanooga. Additionally, the spill prompted TVA to create a new division with the lone purpose of safely storing coal ash.
When you have something like this happen, it's a wake-up call, and it's a mandate to change the way you do business, to be more risk sensitive, to understand the consequences of a failure, to start mitigating, to understand risk and to mitigate those risks.
The ash spill is cleaned up and the old ponds are gone, but this disaster is still not settled.
If I know the dangers that I know today, I really wouldn't have went.
Coming up, hear from workers who say cleaning up this site costs them their health.
A decade after the disaster, TVA is still paying the price for the Kingston spill, and multi-million-dollar lawsuits underway could push the cost of the cleanup even higher. TVA worked early on to protect itself from paying more damages by buying homes and land from property owners around the spill.
So, TVA kept telling everybody, there's no harm, but they insisted that release of future medical benefits was relinquished at the time of settlement.
By cutting a deal with TVA, the landowners gave up their right to sue for any damages and medical costs linked to the ash spill. But apart from the landowners, the health of cleanup workers rang a new set of alarms.
They were making money off of us and killing us at the same time.
TVA hired Jacobs Engineering to clean up the mess, and workers toiled for months and some for years without masks. A suit filed in 2013 claims the cleanup work not only made the workers sick, but some died due to their exposure to the toxic ash. In November, a jury ruled that Jacobs Engineering broke its contract with TVA, and its failures were capable of causing medical conditions ranging from high blood pressure to cancer. TVA is not a party in the lawsuit, but in its annual report, TVA says it could be required to reimburse Jacobs Engineering for some of what it might have to pay because of the litigation. And weeks before the 10-year mark of the spill, Roane County commissioners set aside money to explore suing either TVA or Jacobs Engineering.
Right away, it gave the Kingston, Harriman, and Roane County area a black eye because, you've seen all over the national news. You can still Google Kingston or Harriman or Roane County, and a lot of the ash spill stuff comes up.
Yes. Roane County leaders claim they were deceived by the severity of the ash spill. And in addition, publicity surrounding the lawsuit by sick workers continues to hurt the county's economy.
So we're going back to look and see. We were misled as a county for several years in the beginning how safe it was, and which turns out it wasn't safe, and they've done things to cover that up.
TVA could still face new legal action. It did shut down several ash storage ponds, but the risk remains at some sites. After a lawsuit exposed the leaking ash pond at Gallatin, TVA could be forced to pay up to $900 million to fix the site. In its 2018 annual report, TVA says it could be subject to similar litigation and orders at its other sites. State health inspectors also want TVA to produce evidence that groundwater at all of its sites is safe, whatever the remedy. It appears to follow a similar storyline: more time and more money.
10 years later, the effects of this ash spill can still be seen in lawsuits and the way the industry stores coal ash at its power plants.
Yeah, and really this disaster will likely never go away, the impacts of it. Not as long as plants continue to burn coal for power, and not as long as they continue to bury mountains of ash here in East Tennessee. For Grant Robinson, I'm Jim Matheny. Thanks for watching.